Our criminal justice system has been corrupt since like the 1800s. There have been a lot of improvements over the years, but there is still a lot that could change. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, youth were placed in the same prisons as adults. This was because there weren't any other options. Because of this, youth were often sexually abused physically, treated poorly, lived in deplorable conditions, and other poor living conditions. The first reform made for youth in our criminal justice system was when Thomas Eddy and John Griscom put together the Society for the Prevention of Pauperism. This society worked to prevent youth from being housed in adult prisons, jails, and penitentiaries. Because of the work that John Griscom and Thomas Eddy did, the New York House of Refuge and other reform houses were established beginning in 1825. These houses were for youth in our criminal justice system that did not have a job and did not have a house. There were many more facilities called reform houses, like the New York House of Refuge, that opened throughout the 1800s. By 1840, 25 more facilities like this had opened to house youth that did not have suitable living arrangements or did not have a job and committed criminal action. These reform houses often had lots of like sexual abuse, violent abuse, poor living conditions, corrupt managerial staff, and other stuff. In a way, it was no better than the adult prisons that youth in our criminal justice system were housed before. Reformers started to argue that youth in our criminal justice system needed to be educated in order to succeed in life and improve. Because of this, they started to open reform schools around the country to house criminals who were juvenile. The first publicly funded state reform school opened in 1848 in Massachusetts. There were many others that followed after that. Among the first reform schools was also the San Francisco Reform Industrial School that opened in 1859. This reform school and many others encountered problems like sexual abuse, physical violence, managerial incompetence, and many others. In a way, it wasn't any better than the adult prisons, jails, and penitentiaries. The San Francisco Industrial School was closed down in 1891 due to failing with its corruption. After that, by the mid 1800s, many more options for youth were opened, including probation, cottage houses, and out-of-home placement. The authorities and the reformers kept coming up with new ways to reform the youth in our criminal justice system. However, most of the reform efforts throughout history have been largely unsuccessful. The first juvenile court was established in 1899 in Cook County, Illinois, which was in the Chicago metropolitan area. This and many other juvenile courts that followed involved working on rehabilitation for youth and protection from the criminal justice system. By the 1960s, the public was very concerned about how effective the youth criminal justice system was in preventing crime for youth. This is because the youth judges had discretionary jurisdiction over the youth. Because of this concern, in the 1960s, they formalized the juvenile criminal justice system more and put more due process laws into place for juveniles. In the late 1980s, juvenile crime was on the rise. Because of this, the public thought that the juvenile courts were too lenient. People took a much harsher stance on juvenile criminal justice in the 1970s and 1980s. This was during the same time that the tough on crime laws were taking place. By the mid-1990s, they even incarcerated juveniles into our criminal justice system for minor offenses. Because of there being a rise in incarceration for juveniles, the prisons were very overcrowded, and the youth often lived in deplorable conditions that were very unsafe and unsanitary. Since the late 1990s, juvenile crime has begun to decrease. This has continued through the present era. By 2010, states like California were enacting the most beneficial improvements in our criminal justice system in the history of the United States. All this shows that in the beginning, for a long time, the youth criminal justice system was very corrupt and very horrible conditions, had lots of abuse. But as of late, the juvenile system has dramatically improved. There's a lot of changes still to be done, but this is a step in the right